For a long time, I pushed back on the whole Bukharian culture because I didn't want to accept the judgmentalness, the in your business, pressure you to get married faster, all of this stuff. At one point, I was kind of like, no, I don't want to have this in my life. And then I was so clear for a split moment, I thought, if I'm not going to be proud of my Bukharian self, then what am I?
This episode of Slatki Stol is in partnership with and sponsored by Lionheart Pro, catering to all your filming needs.
So the first question is, I'd rather have gender roles of the opposite sex. Okay, all of the disagreeers, please comment on why.
I'll start it off, I guess, to keep everybody in their own gender roles. I feel like we're born into it, especially in the Bukharian community and culture. Men are men, women are women. Women know their roles, guys know their roles. I feel everybody, for the most part, agrees as a Bukharian male gender roles as well as female gender roles. So that's why I disagree with that statement.
I can kind of piggyback off of that. I agree, we are very set in our gender roles. I think the problem comes from when we start to villainize that role, when we begin to set a little bit of a negative spotlight onto it. Because you are a gender or X gender, you have to do da-da-da-da-da-da-da, or you cannot do da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So when it sets a restriction is when I think it becomes a little bit of a problem. For example, you could say, oh, you're a guy, why are you in the kitchen? I hear that all the time. If a man starts to clean up or cook something, they automatically assume that he shouldn't, or a girl shouldn't go somewhere because she's born into a role. So, although I do agree that these gender roles do set up a good system, and there is beauty in each and every one of them, I think it becomes a little bit problematic at times.
Shades of gray, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I can't be my true self without feeling judged. Agreeers, please step forward.
If you agree.
Wow, very nice. Pour me one too.
While you're at it, please.
Good job, I feel in the Bukharian community, we can't always really be ourselves without being judged. Because if we want to be ourselves, we will get bombarded with questions. Oh, why this, why that, for what you're doing this? This is not you, this is not our traditions. Anything we do, especially in the modern times today, we are limited to what we can be in our full potential because we're always have these generational traumas passed on to us that we just have to remain in the circle of traditions of what we have to do. But today, it's 2023, things are different, you know, and I feel the older generation are not letting go of the modern times. They feel comfortable in their own time zone. They're not in 2023, they're in the 1950s. And it sucks. We want to explore new things, we want to do new things, we want to be with different kinds of people, not the same people. Just imagine what it would be like if we were to do things that we wanted to do without being judged.
I agree on that, actually. I feel like, especially for women, it's if you don't follow what everybody else does, what are you doing in life? You have like standard things that you have to go through, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If you go into Z, everybody's gonna doubt you all the time, and you're gonna feel like you can't do anything in this world.
It's like our older generation is basically saying, we are miserable, we want to put that misery on you.
Exactly.
We don't want to be the only ones that are miserable, so let's put it on our kids, let's put it on our children. If we want to do things differently like they did, like differently than they did, we can't do it because they're jealous of the modern times that they didn't have what we have now.
I don't think it's jealousy. I think they expect us to be better, but their better is not something that we want. We want something more modern, something that we see is going to benefit us and like our mental health, for instance, right? But that's not enough for them because they think that everything, just like you mentioned, they live in the old, like back in the old country, they still have that old mentality where they think that, oh, you have to follow this way, you have to do certain things, you have to be more traditional, like you can't think outside of the box. And when you don't do those things in a modern era, you're just gonna fail in life, because you are so closed in your community and like you don't have an open mind, and you have to open your mind and to move forward and to live a life that you want to live and not be oppressed by your own kind of people, I would say.
Our older generation is very closed-minded.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna join them. They're onto something over here.
Yeah, our older generation is closed-minded, you know, they don't want to be open-minded, and therefore which results in, unfortunately, our younger generation are becoming more depressed. You know, there's especially, you know, like for example, a lot of divorces going on, you know, because they don't get to have the freedom of what they want to do with their lives, or who they want to marry, who they want to be with, or what they want to do with their lives. Passed on generational traumas, oh, be a doctor, be a lawyer, why you do this and that, you know.
Can I add something on to that?
Please.
Okay, so I think a big part that we're missing here is that everyone's in each other's business.
Oh, yes.
All of the time. And
Yes.
why? I think because we come from a very tight community, right? All of our parents are overall from the same area, right?
Yes.
And if you ask your mom or dad, do you know this guy's dad? He'll be like, oh yeah, he still owns the butcher shop across the street or something.
Or we're cousins, or
Right.
we're relatives.
So they were all neighbors, they all knew each other's business, they all grew up saying, oh no, you can't do that, he's gonna find out. Or, well, what are the other people gonna say? Our family did
Yeah, exactly. What if this?
It's all about reputation.
Reputation, that's what it's about. That's what they're afraid of. They're protecting reputation. My name is Leon. I'm 30 years old. What I like about the Bukharian culture is the nightlife, eating, coworkers, just working in general. That's what I love about my people. They're always good to work with.
People are afraid to come out of the box, to think of something new, to do some kind of initiative like what we're doing here, you know? This is something new, and I applaud Sarah, by the way. Most people will stick to their guns because that's what their parents have taught them.
That's what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's what works, and that's the safety net. But what happens when someone brings something new to the table and all of a sudden it's dismissed? You get depression, you get all of this other stuff. You feel like you can't be yourself.
You can't be yourself, and what you end up doing, you end up keeping secrets, you end up hiding, you end up doing everything that you want to do on the down low so nobody knows about you.
And then more people get hurt.
I think a lot of the things that I've heard amongst this conversation was that people don't go outside of the box because they fear essentially being judged. But I'm a big believer that you should be the change that you want to see. And personally, at a certain point in my life, I probably would have stepped forward and agreed with the conversation earlier, but I think at a certain point, there was almost like a moment of clarity where you decide whether your own happiness weighs more than your reputation or what other people might say about you. And I think once you surpass that, you see that it is almost a stereotype to believe that no one in our community will accept us for who we are, but I think once you step outside of the box and you look around, you'll be surprised to see how many people are actually standing next to you. And I think that's very empowering to then continue to be yourself without feeling judged. I think it has a lot to do with who you surround yourself with.
You know, although you are right, I feel like not everybody gets that clarity. Not everybody has the opportunity or the success of actually reaching that clarity.
Of course.
A lot of them are trapped in that standard of Bukharian lifestyle of living of under a specific set of rules or specific standards. And although it would be great if everybody could reach that clarity, at some point in their life, I feel like because our community is so tight-knit and so strong, it is, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's very difficult to achieve it.
Right. And I think to add on to what you were saying, what that eventually leads to is people just deciding that they don't want to be a part of the culture and just piecing out and living their own life elsewhere.
But then you have to argue, how much do you care for that?
Exactly.
There's going to be people that are going to say, oh, you didn't invite me to your wedding? No, I didn't invite you to my wedding because you disagreed with the way I should live my lifestyle, and I want you out of my life. It comes down to other things, it comes down to who you have in your life at that point. Because, say, for example, an aunt, a grandmother has set you to these rules, and then all of a sudden you're rejecting all of that and living your lifestyle that you want to live. It's sort of like they consider it as a spit to their face, and now how do you live your life without them in it? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know if this sounds grim, but you have to remember that they're here temporarily, and you're gonna have to live with the decisions that you made for the rest of your life.
For sure.
So I think that should kind of cast a shadow over that point.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're right, and it is definitely a privilege to even feel the way that I do, so I can acknowledge that as well.
There's also that fear that that person has, a Bukharian person has that fear of actually taking the risk to do something that's not in the tradition. It's the fear that holds them back to do something. And there are there are a lot of Bukharian people that actually like to live in this misery because of the sake of their reputation, and that's what sucks.
When you isolate yourself from a certain crowd of people and you have your own views on things, and when you disattach yourself from the community, I feel like at the end of the day, when you speak about where you're from, right? When people ask you, oh, where you're from, what's your culture like, and everything as such, part of these standards is a part of our culture. I feel like without these standards, we wouldn't have the culture that we have today. So is it sometimes a little too extreme in certain cases, certain scenarios? It definitely is a little too extreme. But I feel like, with proper, I guess, mindsets and with proper, instead of judging in a way where it's like, oh, like, look what this person wore, like, look how she dressed for this wedding, or look how, what he does for a living, or what she does for a living, like, those little judgmental things I feel like definitely might be, subject to change. I feel like throughout the years, once, the older generations pass and come the newer generations that were born here, that were Americans, that are born as Americans, I feel like little by little, these standards are gonna, dissolve slowly. But I feel like if, as a whole, as a community as a whole, when you set a certain standard, certain walls, certain like black and whites, I feel like that's what keeps you as the culture, as the community. Once you leave from there, you're not really part of that culture or community. My name is Jacob. I'm 26 years old and I'm an electrical contractor. What I love about my Bukharian community and culture is the people, how we're always just, no matter what circumstances are, no matter how divided we are, we could always be together and just, hang out around something.
I just want to loop back, I'm sorry. And I don't mean to derail, I just want to put something out there before we go into this other tangent about the future and what the future of the Bukharian community will be like. I think that's something that was really, for me, a turning point and my moment of clarity, as you said, was realizing that my fear of pretending to be somebody that I'm not for the rest of my life was stronger than my fear of being judged. And I would rather face the fear of just being myself and not regretting anything, any decision or any conversation or any relationship, whether that be with family members or with friends or with partners, because we are the first generation of Bukharian Americans. Nobody's done it before us. Nobody will do it after us. We are the first. And I think that that's why, this kind of discourse is so important, to figure out what direction we want to move in and how we want to consciously take part in that movement every single day. But yeah, I just think that it's all about self-reflection and thinking about what's important to you and whether the relationships that we're making in our day-to-day lives are really real, because if you're not being yourself when you're building these relationships, then how real could they possibly be? Hi, I'm Sharon. I'm 24 years old. I'm a lawyer and also the creator and host of Chai Podcast. I guess what I love most about my Bukharian culture is the community and of course the food.
Definitely, that's very spot on. Although, what I have to say to that is, eventually, with that type of mindset, and when you go down this path of, I do what I want to do and continue as an individual, aside as just as a community or as a culture, I feel like little by little, say, I have somebody that I know that told me, hey man, like, I don't even care for marrying a Jewish girl or not. Like, I'll marry somebody non-Jewish, and by the time everybody gets older, no one's even gonna care, no one's even gonna realize. And if you think about it, if you get enough people to think that way, how much of the culture really will there be left? How much, if you start mixing interracial cultures together, our culture isn't really as known, or as, I know almost all of you here, when people ask you who you guys are, where you're from, you don't say Bukharian, you say Russian.
Yeah, we say Russian.
Right? Well, I mean,
At a point, I said Russian.
the majority of people say Russian, that's already says something that not everybody really wants to be kind of part of the community, and they do, and it's like on the fence, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So I feel like if there are certain, like, yeah, you could definitely live your life, you could do however you feel like you want to do your life, but I feel like when you have these cultural guidelines and cultural, black and whites, where that this may not be a good thing, or this is a good thing, well, certain things I feel like are very vital for our community and our culture, and certain things I feel like definitely could be, open to change.
Of course. I mean, and I do think that it's important to distinguish that I was just trying to say that I feel that I can be myself while being in the community. I don't feel that I have to be somebody else. And I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. I can be myself and also be Bukharian and feel welcomed by my Bukharian friends and my Bukharian family.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to ask whether you feel that you could still be yourself while respecting your culture.
Definitely.
Because in my opinion, my culture is a big part of who I am. So it all comes down to happiness. Respect is one thing, and I think respect for our culture should be there just as a foundational aspect, because that was instilled in us from our parents and our grandparents. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that we are an individual as well as someone that's a part of a greater community. And the question, I think, is, do you put yourself first or do you put your community first? Hi, my name is Johnny. I'm 24 years old. I am currently a law student, and my favorite thing about my culture is the food.
Good cheers!
Cheers.
Borukhov Adonai. Halloweenu met gewoon dan free Adama. Amen. Amen.
I feel an extreme amount of pressure to start a family.
Say it again.
So just follow me.
Really? Okay, nice.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear you.
I feel, or I felt, an extreme amount of pressure to start a family.
Definitely.
So when do we begin?
Definitely felt, however you want to call it. The pressure is a real thing. Our Bukharian community, I feel like, really turns the heat on when it comes to starting a family, especially starting it young. I feel like, you could be 18 or you could be 19 or you could even be, I don't even know. I have a cousin that got married at 17.
Yeah, they start them mad early.
And I feel like the pressure really comes from the fact that back in the day, I guess you could call it, back in Dushanbe or Tashkent or wherever anyone else's family's from, that it was a very regular thing to get married early and to start your family early. So because that mindset was instilled into our parents and grandparents, it's kind of not forced on us, but I feel like everybody tries to do it in a nice way. But
You could say
forced, I feel like some families, yes, it matters on the approach, but ultimately, Yeah, it's definitely pressure.
It mostly comes from
Yeah.
It mostly comes from the grandmas. They're like
Grandmas,
they're
yeah.
like the
Bachim.
spies. Yeah, they just look at all the girls like, у меня есть внук. Давай познакомим.
That one phone call.
That one phone call. They're the best spies ever.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to backtrack a little. I think this has to do with not just with Bukharians. I think it has to do with most Jews.
Yes.
Most Jewish communities will have this. It's a mitzvah, really, to reproduce. So I could see why it could be such a high level of priority for most Jews. Anyway, I think why it's like this is because of how they were raised. Again, going back in time to, I guess, the early 1900s or late 1800s, they were constantly going through war, constantly losing people in their family, constantly, like we see this today even, unfortunately, like with everything going on in Israel. And the number one thing people run to is reproduction. We got to keep the generation going.
6 million lost, we got to rebuild them, yeah.
That's the kind of mindset that they were raised into. They were sent off into marriage as early as 14, 16 years old.
Oh, yeah.
So for them to see us at 23, 25, it's like, time's ticking. Like,
They don't even give us the chance or privilege to at least, be, just find yourself, explore yourself a little bit, have some fun.
they never had
travel.
that chance either.
They never had that
They
chance.
were
Why
kind
they
of
put it on
locked
us? They
into,
put it on
yeah,
us.
exactly. Going back to the gender roles, they were kind of forced into that, I guess.
Yeah, the gender roles, it's like, the woman being submissive and the man just working, and it's like we never get the chance to actually explore ourselves. We never get a chance to travel, do anything with our lives.
It's a huge privilege that we have, even to have the option to be like, I don't want to do that right now when your grandma calls you up and says, I have a guy, I have a girl, whatever.
Yeah.
To say, Grandma, I'm good, it's like, you don't understand. They didn't have that back in the day. Like, they were forced. Like, there is no asking this question.
Arranged marriages,
exactly.
Yes, arranged.
So I consider us very lucky to have that option, but in their eyes, of course, it's not ideal.
I feel like, especially from like parents and grandparents, and from my experience, they almost like don't take you serious until you get married, until you start a family. And I see it with with my cousins and like people of similar age. As soon as they get married, like that's it. You're a man or you're a full woman now. Now I can take you serious.
Yeah, they don't respect you until you are actually established, marriage, kids, all that, job, house.
Like you
when
could
you have
be a
all
successful like whatever you want, but if you're not married,
What's the first question they ask you when they see you, and if they haven't seen you in a long time is,
yes,
Tanya Boots, like,
when is the next kid coming? When's the house?
It's always something like with marriage, with children, with grandkids, something like that. I think that's their first level of priorities.
What about you? You're fairly quiet.
Yeah.
I think that the reason that I feel pressured or have maybe felt pressured to have kids or start a family at some point in my life or now is obviously all of the reasons that you guys mentioned, but also I think just by virtue of being a woman, I think that like that how do I say, that value is placed on you as you're the child's rearer and you're the birth giver, your purpose on this earth and your quest to fulfill that purpose has a limited time. So I think that always kind of being in the media just generally and like the world plus and substantially through all of these other things through our families is a lot. It's a lot.
I definitely think it's tougher on a woman than on a man. I think it's 100 times tougher. I feel like I have plenty of girl cousins, and if I haven't heard my grandma tell them at least once a day, like, is there anybody or anything? I feel like it's a lot tougher for a woman than it is for a man. I feel like for a man it's slightly more lenient. I feel like my grandfather always tells me stories of how he got married at the age of 30 to my grandma who was 17, and he's like, yeah, don't worry about it as a man, you got your time, like, it's all right. Like, I feel like for a woman, it's like night and day. I feel like it's way more pressure on to a woman to get married. Biological clock, there you go, that's what it is.
I mean, scientifically speaking, I think that semen also, like the value of it kind of like sort of decreases a little over time, but overall, yeah, you're right.
I beg to differ, but I feel...
Let's not get
you beg to
too
differ
real.
with science.
Yeah, I think let's not.
Yeah.
Hi guys.
Please explain.
I feel like I do sometimes have like the pressure from like my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, but not from like my immediate family. So I feel like that's the most important part for me. If they are pressuring me, then that would be an issue. But as of now, I told them my career is more important for me than like marriage. Until I set my goal and until I get to where I want to be, I'm not gonna get married, right? So I think they understand that, and I'm very clear with my goal, and they understand that because, you know, we all have our differences, and if they got married, whenever they got married, doesn't mean that I'm gonna get married at that age. So yeah.
That's a good point you bring up about the career. You know, as we are all young professionals, we have our careers pretty much either beginning or are almost beginning. So how do you feel about telling your parents or grandparents, like, I'm gonna focus on my career, then focus on relationships?
At least like it gets started.
I think
with
it's
your
different
career.
with women and men.
I feel like
also.
if we get started with our career, then for us like thinking about like serious relationship is much easier. I feel like also for men it's the same way. As long as they know where they are and where they're going, it's going to be easier for them to build with somebody who they see a fit with, especially if that person complements them. Because a lot of times guys is like supporting females the most important part. As long as she supports them with their goals, and as long as she understands what they need to achieve that goal is the most important thing. For females, we don't really have to do what achieve like the career goal, but I feel like it's more for us, for our personal growth. And if we do that, we will say that yes, we accomplished something in life, and we don't need somebody else to tell us. Yeah, it's independence, and like just to understand that we were able to do with somebody else's help or without somebody else's like need. Yeah, it's like support. Yeah, financial.
I feel like there's definitely pressure for both to start a career and to start a family. And from my own experience, I feel like when I try to like use that excuse for like, I don't want to get married until I'm done with school, to them it's like, oh, what are you talking about? You'll just get married and you'll go back, like, yeah, you just continue with school, like, don't worry about it. But in all reality, like, to plan a wedding takes a lot, to like go through it, just the physical and the mental pressure. It's a lot. So I feel like it's difficult to do both, but it's definitely expected, especially as a man, because you have to provide for the family, quote unquote.
We're not even going to mention how much weddings in Bukharian community cost.
Right.
Speaking of weddings, I have a whole topic to talk
so
about.
you're the professional here.
Life is harder for the opposite gender.
Yeah. Fuck
Yeah.
it. Yeah. All right.
Ladies first.
Wow, very chivalrous. All of us men sat down on this question.
Well, even though I'm a female, we do have our difficulties that we go through throughout our life. But I feel like for you guys, even though you guys have it easier, like in certain parts, right? It's still difficult for you at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we still have, the community has the standards for a man. You need to provide, you need to make a certain amount of money, like we previously spoke about. You have to have a standard, you have to have a certain career. And at the end of the day, I feel like majority of the time, for guys, it's harder to find a girl as well. Not because of the looks, this and that, it's because girls choose at the end of the day. Let's say if she doesn't want you, she's not gonna be with you, you know what I mean? She sees that something's wrong, she's not gonna be with you. Let's say if a girl is not impressed by the fact that you took her out on a date to like a coffee shop on the first time that you spoke, right? The first meet, she's gonna be like, oh, he's cheap, I don't wanna go out with him. She's gonna move on to the next guy, is it not true? I understand there's certain standards, but I feel like you guys have to put a little bit more effort in the beginning and then kind of afterwards as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But we also have our difficulties. I'm not saying we don't. Hi everyone, my name is Daria and I'm 22 years old. I work in real estate, and favorite part about my culture is food, especially borscht and some joma.
I don't know if I would say it's harder to be a woman than a man. It definitely is hard to be a woman, and I think especially with current day and age that we live in, with such a rise in feminism and everything is such that, you know, a woman isn't not only is she required to be a housewife in certain situations, or to raise kids, or to be cooking, cleaning, whatever it could be, you know, she also holds herself accountable for her own aspirations, you know, whether she wants to be a nurse or a lawyer or a doctor or whatever the case may be. It's an additional responsibility for the female to uphold, and I think it becomes difficult, I think, more recently than it was in our parents' times or grandparents' times. I feel like before it was very set in stone. Woman stays home, cooks, cleans, gives birth to children, raises kids, while the man is out providing, protecting, whatever you want to call it. As a whole, I think in America specifically, it is tough to be a woman. I feel they get more judged than men. I feel men get judged, definitely they do get judged. But women get definitely judged way more, and I feel they have, in America again, I'm saying, they have a lot more on their plate. And again, it also matters on the girl if she takes that upon herself. You know, some girls, they want to stay at home, they want to be the at-home wife, they want to cook, clean, and raise kids, and that's all they want to do. And then there are other women that, you know, have aspirations, you know, outside of just going out and, you know, being out in the world, they want to be something they want to be something themselves. They don't just want to be a housewife, they want to be more than just a housewife. And because of that, I feel it is sometimes harder for a woman to be a woman.
I think even women without a goal of a career or some sort of higher education still has an enormous amount of pressure. I think that the list for men is quite short, and that might be a controversial thing to say, but I think men have, although very dense and heavy responsibilities, I think with society and also the help of our families, those goals are a lot easier to achieve, like providing for your family, buying a house, you know, having a stable job, food, shelter, basic necessities. When it comes to extra things like driving a nice car or what neighborhood you live in, I think that's already self-inflicted pressure. When it comes to a woman, there's, I think, an endless list of things that are expected of a woman. I also think that when things go wrong, whether that be in a family or, well, essentially in a family, because that's what we're talking about, I think the first person that people look at is the wife, the woman. Like if the kids are, like they say, the first person they look at is the mom. If the kids walk around with dirty clothes, the first person they look at is the mom. If the parents come over and the house is a mess, first person they yell at is the wife. So I think that for a woman, she always has to be on her toes. She always has to make sure that she looks good, that people have a sense of like respect towards her, that she keeps her image. And although there are similar pressures on men, I think it's a lot more apparent in our community towards women. And like you said with careers, that just adds an exponential amount of pressure on top of that.
I think it's exceptionally hard to be a man because we have to basically do everything for a woman. We have to, you know, provide for them, we have to take care of them, we have to, you know, basically we have to deal with life difficulties, especially we have to deal with their emotions, we have to deal with everything that has to do with the woman. And especially, just an example, like especially if, let's say, there's a man that has to deal with a pregnant woman, of course he has to also deal with her emotions as well, you know, pregnancy and everything. It's also very hard to be a woman, I understand, because a woman is, you know, we need women in life because no person in the world besides a woman can give life to a human. You know, it's a very hard thing to do, you know, and we have to appreciate that. So I think that's the most difficult thing for a woman to have, is just to give birth. And
Not just birth,
a lot of other things. But that's the most difficult thing for a woman to do. You know, it's not easy to give life, but also it's also very difficult to be a man.
So technically they just disagree with Dasha, right?
No, I agree with them. It's just I wanted to, like, I also think that guys have it tough as well, but there was no like middle, so I just decided to come out.
I think it matters on the case that you speak about. I feel like everybody has it different than the person next to them, you know. You could have an easy life, you know, subjectively, and I could have a tougher life, or vice versa, you know. I feel like it matters on the detail of who exactly you're talking
Right,
about.
everything is relative. I understand. I agree. I do think, though, that everything that you guys said is just so compelling. I completely agree. I think that women definitely have exponentially higher societal expectations and standards requirements that they're subjected to, which of course is not go to negate any of the experiences that men have. I completely agree that obviously men have a huge pressure on them as well, but it's just like the societal standard that all of it is on the woman's shoulders, when in reality it does not have to be.
I feel like it mainly surrounds around the fact that, you know, if we just kept everybody at their own gender roles, I feel like the man's life is a lot tougher than the woman's. But I feel like I said before, because we live in a society where feminism is on a rise, and, you know, women want to aspire to their own careers and, you know, whatever they'd like to do, I feel like they add another set of responsibilities and, you know, hardship upon themselves, you know, which makes life tougher.
I agree, but I also disagree with something that you said. I think even if we put aside all of the societal pressures, which is a huge, huge boulder on our shoulders, don't get me wrong, I agree with all of that. I think life as a woman, period, is harder than a man's life. You don't have to go through a period every month. You don't have to go through childbirth. You don't have to have the responsibilities not only of your house, but of your children, but like everything that you were saying, that it's all on the woman, and not only just to keep up all of that, but to keep herself up. But most of the time, a man will focus most of his time on taking care of himself, the income, and the people he loves, right?
So
And not on the same level.
I think men and women have it hard. You
Right.
know, no, I think it's more equal. Even though women have a little bit more hard, I think men also have it exceptionally a little bit more, like in the same level.
Define why you think it's harder or hard.
Again, we as men, we have to deal, like any man that's in a relationship with a woman, he has to deal with everything that the woman deals with, but times two. Because not only is she's feeling what she's feeling, but he has to deal with also with her emotional side of what she's going through in her life. And he has to figure out a solution on how to make it better. And there can be many solutions. Maybe one solution might not work. He has to try many other solutions.
Can a woman do the same for a man?
It doesn't take that much to please a man. It doesn't take that much.
Is emotion reserved only for women? I think that's another stigma in our community, that men can't be emotional.
You know, we're not allowed to be emotional. We have to just suck it up and take it like a man. You know, we don't have time to be emotional. We have to, you know, unfortunately.
Toxic. Sorry.
What?
It's very toxic mentality. Yeah. It's not against you. I'm saying generally the community that holds up this kind of mentality. It's very not right.
It is toxic. I agree.
I wouldn't say it's toxic. I think
to say men can't express emotion.
No, I think it's actually, you know, that mentality was and is only in America. I feel like for a man, in order for him to, not every man expresses emotion, you know, and I feel certain men express it different ways. Everybody has their own ways of expressing. Not everybody could sit and cry, for example, or you know, everybody has their own ways of expressing themselves. But I feel for a man, it is. We have an unspoken standard of stoicism where we have to be, you know, like, for example, like this is what I do with my little brother, you know, like I if I see him crying, I won't let him cry. I won't let him cry because I want him to have that tougher exterior,
I think that goes
tougher
against
shell.
stoicism, though.
No, I wouldn't say it goes against stoicism. If you're able to endure a certain amount of, you know, hardship or pain and you know, absorb that type of, you know.
Right, but a stoic is an intellect.
Okay.
And an intellect is in touch with their emotions.
Okay.
I think that what you said with not being, like, everyone has their own way of showing their emotions, I think that's what leads to, number one, a very high rate of suicide amongst men, and number two, a very high rate of violence. I think if we teach men from a young age to express emotion properly, that would avoid a lot of catastrophe, a lot of problems, and hopefully a lot of trauma.
Being vulnerable is a weakness.
My brother.
Let's cheers to that one. We got a lot to talk about.
Is being vulnerable a weakness? It definitely is.
Absolutely.
What is the definition of the word vulnerable? All right, let's ask Siri. I'm not a dictionary, but I think it coincides with the word weakness, wouldn't you say? If you're vulnerable, vulnerable is a type of weakness, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you gotta be very careful who you be vulnerable to, because a lot of people could take advantage of your vulnerability. It's very hard to express emotion, especially with a society today of where they don't want to deal with your emotions.
It's definitely vulnerable. Being vulnerable is definitely a weakness, because if you don't show vulnerability, you don't really show what affects you or what doesn't affect you. And when you don't show that, you are not vulnerable.
Yeah, that's how they don't take advantage
Exactly.
of you, because if they don't know what's your weakness, they won't take advantage of you and they won't shit on you.
Exactly.
I made that mistake plenty of times.
Of course, as we all have. Disagreeers, come join us.
Okay, I think I'll start off this one. Kind of expressing your emotions doesn't mean that you're weak or some. Well, I understand that somebody can use them against you, your feelings or your fears, right? But as long as you know who you share it with, you don't have to go around and blab to every single person about how you feel or what scares you. You obviously have a mother, not a dad probably, because in Bukharian community, as we all know, a dad's gonna be like, you have to be a man, you can't do this.
Sometimes it's the mother.
Sometimes
Listen,
it's the mother, yeah, exactly.
Okay, fine, mother, just find a person that you can talk to, or even go to like a therapist. It helps, it really helps. And I just feel like this stigma of like certain things that there is in Bukharian community, oh, you have to do this, you can do this, you can do that. No, it's just not right. As mentioned before, brings back to violence against your kids, towards your female, like your wife or your girlfriend or your mother even sometimes, you know what I mean? So it's like, at the end of the day, you have to know how to deal with your emotions. And yeah, people are gonna say it's an American thing, but I think it's a great thing. I think it's like one of the things that was found by American psychologists that was able to kind of crack down that problem that men have. You can be a tough man, you can be a very strong personality man, but you can also be a man that can share his emotions, and that's not a weakness. That's actually your strength. If you're able to say what you feel from inside and express it to the person and not feel ashamed or feel that you're weak, that's the biggest strength for me, at least. If a man can come to me and say, listen, I'm feeling this way, I know that you might not solve my problems, but I just want you to know, I just need that emotional support, no problem. It's gonna be compliment for me if somebody comes to me, you know what I mean? It's like, I know they trust me and I can see how strong they are, because sharing your emotions is the most difficult thing you can do on this planet, literally.
So hypothetically speaking, if you were to, talk with a man, right, and tell him that to express his emotions, right, and you were to use those, like let's say, hypothetically speaking, you got into an argument with this man, and you just wanted to take revenge and say something that he said to you that would make him vulnerable in an argument. You can't trust anybody these days, maybe a therapist. It could slip without you even knowing. You could say something that would actually make him very vulnerable towards you, and it would, you wouldn't notice that you would say that in an argument.
I would argue that if that happens, you're with the wrong partner.
Yeah, you are with the wrong partner. You have to have that mutual understanding that if you share something, it's not to use it against me, or it's your weapon, right? It's something that it's like, deep inside of me, and I want to share with you just because I want you to feel that you're valued in my life. And I think that certain things I can kind of go along, certain things that I can do with you is like towards my future and our future. So that's how I perceive it. But if somebody uses it against you, you already know that moment, that person is not for you. You have to move on from that person and kind of like leave that in the past, you know?
I will say one thing. I do agree with both of you, but to an extent. I do agree that being too vulnerable is a weakness. I think that there are certain things that I would never share with anybody out of fear of being perceived as weak. But that's something that I actively try to work against, because I agree with what all of you have said, where vulnerability shows trust and it shows strength. And I don't think it should be looked at as a weakness. I think it should be looked at as a strength, because it shows that you're so in tune with yourself and what you feel that you're able to articulate it to a point where the other person agrees, or maybe they don't agree but they understand you, and then they can in return act better or like fulfill the role that you need them to fill as a partner, as a brother, friend, or whatever the case might be.
I will add that the rage and violence that is the outcome of most men,
right,
or women, whatever, most women or men suppressing that vulnerability is the sign of weakness, not the opposite. So I don't think that, like she said, sharing something with your partner or mother or therapist will show any sign of weakness, because you're a human at the end of the day, no matter male or female. And if you don't let it go or let it out, it will show itself in seriously scary ways. Hi, my name is Malika. I'm currently a medical scribe at an OBGYN office, and I'm studying for my MCAT. I love my Bukharian culture because of the communal support, the food, and the eyebrows.
I agree.
I agree on that one.
I disagree. I'm going to tell you why. So essentially the question was, is vulnerability a weakness? Mm-hmm. Are we able to get a definition here of the word vulnerable?
Susceptible to a physical or emotional attack or harm.
Susceptible is the key word.
Okay.
Susceptible, not
Right.
prone to or 1000% causing
Right,
harm.
but it's more probable than not.
It depends on the people that you surround yourself with and the
Exactly.
relationships that you have,
So
of course.
vulnerability is only vulnerability if you aren't mentally strong enough to consider it
No,
not
I
a
disagree.
Vulnerability shows that although I know that I am now making myself more susceptible to harm, I'm still choosing to do so out of the strength and courage and not out of weakness.
Like what you're doing now, what we're all doing now. All of us, it took a lot of courage to come here and be vulnerable today, to answer these questions unabashedly, to answer these questions wholeheartedly, to participate in this kind of discourse requires vulnerability. I don't think that that necessarily makes us weaker. I think that we are determined and we're striving towards something better, which requires vulnerability. Without vulnerability, we'll never really know who the other person across the table is. We'll never really have a real relationship or a friendship. I think that it surpasses relationships with significant others. I think that it goes to the relationships you have with your parents, the relationships you have with your coworkers, with anybody in your life. If you're going to go through life with those walls up, fearing that any sort of even iota of vulnerability will be perceived as weakness or will perceive as you not being man enough. It just seems like a really sad and like jaded life where you're just like afraid to be yourself all the time. When will you ever have the opportunity to be 100% yourself?
Sorry, just like you said earlier, it blocks you from having actual, real, healthy relationships. It all comes down back to that.
From being vulnerable.
Yes.
It blocks you from having real relationships.
From real healthy relationships.
Well, it matters again. There are a lot of variables with what you're saying. You know, you could be vulnerable with a random person, and the outcome could be just as random as the person is. You know, the person could take it as your weakness, or you could take it like, wow, this person just genuinely opened up and he told me X, Y, and Z. He must be very, strong-minded to do so. You know, it matters on the person. but ultimately, you know, it's more probable that your vulnerability will be used against you as a weakness. That's just the way that the world works. Unfortunately, not everybody is as intelligent to be able to control their vulnerabilities, you know, mentally, or able to sustain them mentally, physically, whatever the case may be. So unfortunately, the world that we live in, and I feel like it's just the world that it is generally, vulnerability is always considered a weakness.
Do you think it stems with confidence as well? If you're like sure enough in yourself not to care how that person will perceive it or how they will take advantage of it.
So vulnerability definitely works hand in hand with confidence. You know, for example, if somebody isn't tall enough or, you know, big enough or whatever the case may be, or however you want to put it, that is his vulnerability. That's what he is essentially insecure about. Insecurities, vulnerabilities, they can all fall under the same category, you know.
They're mental.
You know, vulnerability, insecurities, weakness, they all fall under that same category of, you know, a weakness. I don't know what other word I could use for it other than weakness, but
I think as someone that, I think I'm extremely confident in myself, in my manlyhood, in the role that I fulfill in everybody's, like in my life, you know. And I think that a part of being confident is being vulnerable. Because with confidence comes a sense of surety that I am who I am, and nobody can take that from me. But just one question for you specifically, and not to get too personal, but have you ever experienced some sort of trauma in life?
of course, I feel everybody experiences their own traumas.
It was a bit of a rhetorical question. So why I ask that is, after going through trauma, did you have the ability to talk about it with someone and to kind of unravel that trauma and make sense of it?
Not sure. It's hard to tell. Hard to say. You can't really always get a definitive answer for something like that. It's more something that comes through time. I feel like when you deal with stuff like that. But
when dealing with a challenging issue, do you find it better to find a solution on your own, or to come to a group of people that you trust and ask their opinion?
So let me ask, I'm going to answer your question with a question. Sure. Would you share your vulnerabilities with a random individual?
No.
Why not?
I don't trust them.
Because it'll show a sign of weakness upon yourself,
No.
and you don't trust the other person to take advantage of that weakness.
It doesn't show a sign of weakness on myself. I think it shows a sign of weakness on the relationship that I have with the person.
No, but that's the point of it. If you're vulnerable, right? If you consider being vulnerable a strength, that means you could share your vulnerabilities with anybody and it'll make you stronger.
I can share my vulnerabilities with anybody.
To an extent.
I have.
Okay.
For females, it's much easier than for male.
I don't think that that's necessarily true.
Well, you have the mental capacity to do so. Not everybody has that mental capacity to do so because it's a vulnerability. It's a
if you
weakness.
meet someone on the street, like you just said, a random person, and they say, "How are you doing?" I think it's societally encouraged to answer by saying, "I'm good."
Yeah.
But if I would have that same question posed by my mother, and if I was feeling, for example, depressed, I wouldn't say good, I would say I'm feeling depressed. I would show my vulnerability.
Right, but then again, when you do it with the people that are closest to you, you know you're going to get that unconditional love type of answer from them. So you're able to be vulnerable with certain people. You're able to be vulnerable with certain people is because with certain people you could be weak, you could show your weakness because you know they're not going to do anything to attack that weakness. You know they're not going to do anything as such to harm that vulnerability of yours or make it grow. So because of that, you're able, like I said, it has a lot of variables to that question. So the ultimate variable is who you're vulnerable around. And if you do it in a non-partial level, when you do it with somebody, obviously somebody you're very close with, you're able to be vulnerable with them because you trust them enough to be vulnerable with them. They're that close to you.
I think it's a privilege for me to be vulnerable with someone, and
Absolutely.
I don't think that everybody deserves that privilege.
Absolutely.
I genuinely love my culture.
Let's get it.
I'm surprised he's staying back there.
Yeah. All right.
Guys, can we pour like chai and just like go whoop?
I got wine over here. I'll
That's
cheers
good
with wine,
enough.
but the
I'll do a
teapot is
chai.
over there.
Where
It's
is
right
it?
there. Repeat the question one more time.
I genuinely love my
Sorry, guys. Girls first.
Genuinely love my culture.
Yeah.
You sure?
Sorry guys, I have
No?
to sit this one
I
out.
have.
I'll pour you your wine anyway.
Make it very full.
Even though you don't genuinely love your culture,
Yeah, it's
I'll
okay.
still pour you wine.
Still love you. I genuinely do love my culture. I feel like no matter where you place us in the world, we stand out as a culture. I feel like just the way that we speak, just the way that we behave, you know, our food, you know, although, yeah, it's Central Asia, they have similar foods to us, but the way we make our food and with the love that we do it, atushi, you know, and like the little details, like the semichki on the table, you know, we got chai, these are the things that you grow up around. These are the things that are embedded into your, you know, mind and into your heart. You know, it really makes you appreciate the little things of your culture. You know, weddings and festivities. You know, everybody got their own weddings and festivities. Everybody could, you know, compare to each other's. But ultimately, as a culture and as a society, community, I feel you definitely gotta love who you are and where you're from. You know, in order to actually understand who you are, you got to really love who you are.
I feel like also, yes, I agree. But also it's like food, the dancing, and also like when there's like a Shabbat dinner, right before it, everybody starts calling each other, oh, are you coming today? Oh yeah, okay, no problem. Should I bring anything? It's like that sense of community it's a very strong community, I would 100% say that. And also the fact that even though there are differences, but there are so many similarities in every single person. At the end of the day, we're all gonna agree on one thing, and we're probably gonna love one thing as well, and it's just gonna be like when we get together, we're gonna dance, we're gonna party, and we're gonna have a good time, no matter our differences, no matter what we do. At the end of the day, a little bit of chai, a little bit of sandwich, the food, the bakhsh, this, that, everything's gonna be fine, you know? And
I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a little bit, okay? I'm gonna back you up on this one just for a second. For a long time, I'll get there, hold on. For a long time, I pushed back on the whole Bukharian culture because I didn't want to accept everything that we just said tonight, the judgmentalness, the in your business, the forcing you to, you know, to pressure you to get married faster, all of this stuff. At one point I was kind of like, no, I don't want to have this in my life. And then I was so clear for a split moment, I thought, if I'm not going to be proud of my Bukharian self, then what am I? Like, why would I try to destroy a piece of myself? Rather, I should celebrate all the goodness that comes with being Bukharian. Leon, I'm looking at you. Oh, think about all the opportunities that you got because you're Bukharian, all the joy that you've gotten because you're Bukharian.
all the eyebrows.
Shout out Barumah.
Literally.
Of course I love my Bukharian culture. I think that, just like Malka was saying, I was definitely self-hating for a very long time and hated a lot of the baggage that comes with being Bukharian, but I feel like after doing a lot of introspection and working on what my priorities are, particularly in my relationship with myself, I realized that it's so important to love that part of myself, because otherwise I'll never be able to say that I'm acceptant or loving of everything that I am.
To wrap up, I think we should make Bukharian culture or the community what we envision the perfect ideal Bukharians to be like. We have this
I don't think there's such
opportunity now.
It's definitely in our hands to see how, you know, how it goes further, you know, with our kids, future kids, God willing, and, you know, their kids. I feel like it's in our hands to really dictate what our culture really is, and
For them to be proud of it.
Exactly, and I feel like there definitely will be, you know, a little bit of dilution of certain aspects of our culture, but I think for the most part, and I think, although you disagree, I think you could agree on, you know, the culture as a whole. You know, you can't, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. I know, I see you drinking at weddings. You gotta love it. You gotta, no matter what, you know, no matter how divided we can be with our opinions, we were still all able to sit and laugh at certain topics, you know, like we're still able to laugh and joke, and, you know, the pickles were here, everybody had a pickle, you know, it's, now the pickles became part of the culture, and, like, you know, like, we're always will be able to find something to sit and laugh and love over. And I would definitely want to cheers to that.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheers.
To being Bukharian.
To being Bukh.
Cheers, everybody.